Uh, Go back and listen to the
Indeed.
two principals once again. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Putin held bilateral talks at the Hyderabad House in New Delhi. The two leaders held detailed discussions aimed at further strengthening the bilateral relationship between the two countries. The Prime Minister said that India and Russia share a long-lasting and time-tested bond.
एक्सेलेंसी, मेरे परम मित्र, मेरे लिए खुशी की बात है कि मुझे फिर से एक बार भारत में आपका स्वागत करने का अवसर मिला है। कल से आपके डेलीगेशन के लोग अनेक मीटिंगों में व्यस्त रहे हैं और बहुत सारे आउटकम के साथ आज हमारी ये समिट आगे बढ़ रही है। एक्सेलेंसी, आपकी यात्रा बहुत ही ऐतिहासिक है। 2001 में जब आपने कार्यभार संभाला और भारत की आपकी यात्रा पहली हुई, उसको आज 25 साल हो गए और उस पहली यात्रा में ही स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप की एक मजबूत नींव रखी गई थी। मेरे लिए पर्सनली भी खुशी की बात है कि आपके साथ मेरे परिचय को और संबंधों को उसको भी 25 साल हो गए। एक्सेलेंसी, मैं मानता हूं कि ये जो 2001 में आपने जो भूमिका अदा की, एक विजनरी लीडर कैसे सोचता है, कहाँ से शुरू करता है और संबंधों को कहाँ तक पहुँचा सकता है, इसका एक उत्तम उदाहरण भारत रशिया के संबंध है। एक्सेलेंसी, यूक्रेन के संकट के बाद हमारी लगातार चर्चा होती रही है। आपने भी समय समय पर एक सच्चे मित्र के रूप में हमें सभी चीज़ों से अवगत कराया। मैं समझता हूँ कि ये विश्वास बहुत बड़ी ताकत है और आपको मैंने अनेक बार इस विषय की चर्चा भी की है और विश्व समक्ष भी मैंने रखा है कि विश्व का कल्याण शांति के मार्ग पर ही है। हम सबको मिलकर के शांति के रास्ते तलाशने चाहिए और पिछले दिनों जो प्रयास चल रहे हैं, मुझे पूरा विश्वास है कि विश्व फिर से एक बार शांति की दिशा में लौटेगा। एक्सेलेंसी, पिछले दिनों विश्व समुदाय के सभी नेताओं से जब भी मेरी बात हुई और उन्होंने जब विस्तार से मेरे चर्चा की, मैंने हमेशा कहा है कि भारत न्यूट्रल नहीं है, भारत का पक्ष है और वो पक्ष शांति का है। हम शांति के हर प्रयासों का समर्थन करते हैं और हम शांति के हर प्रयासों के साथ कंधे से कंधा मिला करके खड़े हैं। पूरे विश्व ने कोविड से लेकर के अब तक कई संकटों से गुजरा है। हम आशा करते हैं कि बहुत ही जल्द विश्व को चिंताओं से मुक्ति मिलेगी और एक सही दिशा में प्रगति के राह पर विश्व समुदाय को एक नई आशा पैदा होगी। एक्सेलेंसी, मुझे पूरा भरोसा है कि आज दिन भर हम अनेक विषयों पर चर्चा करने वाले हैं। भारत और रशिया के आर्थिक संबंधों का अधिक विस्तार हो, हम नई नई ऊंचाइयों को प्राप्त करें, ऐसे बहुत ही आशावादी आउटकम के साथ हम हमारी इस मीटिंग को आगे बढ़ाएंगे, ये मेरा पूरा विश्वास है। माय फ्रेंड, मैं फिर से एक बार आपका हृदय से बहुत बहुत स्वागत करता हूँ।
Excellency, Prime Minister, dear friends, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me and for yesterday evening too. It was very good, friendly, and at the same time a very substantial talk. I could share a great deal of details about the events taking place in Ukraine. We are dating together with some partners, including the United States, on a possible peaceful settlement. Thank you for the attention aimed at finding a solution to this situation. Our relations are deeply rooted into history, but it is not the words that that matter. It is the substance of the matter which is very profound. We really appreciate that, and the fact that you, ex-Prime Minister, pay special personal attention to that. Over the past years, we have done a great deal of work to develop our relationship. As our countries and our economies move have more opportunities for cooperation, we open additional areas for cooperation, including those related to high-tech, aircraft, space exploration, high-tech, and artificial intelligence. We have very close and trusting cooperation in the military and technical area, and we are planning to move forward in all of these areas. This once again underscores the level and the trust of our relationship. Our teams have done a great work before this visit. They have prepared a great number of documents for us. We have an opportunity to talk in more detail about some of them. I'm sure that we'll have a very fruitful working day.
Right, so there you heard the opening comments by the two leaders, Prime Minister Modi and President Putin, ahead of their delegation-level talks at the 23rd India-Russia Summit taking place in New Delhi. Time to bring in our guest joining us on this broadcast, Ambassador Meera Shankar, former Indian ambassador to the United States and Germany. Also with us is Professor Rahul Mishra from the Jawaharlal Nehru University. Ambassador Shankar, welcome to DD India. We are standing by for the press statements by the two leaders as the summit is underway, we are told. But let's hear from you about how the visit has shaped up so far, starting from his arrival, President Putin's arrival in New Delhi yesterday, where he was received by the Prime Minister, no less, and his engagements through the evening and this morning as well.
I think it's quite clear that Prime Minister Modi has extended a special gesture to President Putin by receiving him at the airport.
Right.
It's beyond protocol, beyond normal protocol. And then the two leaders have driven together in the limousine for a private dinner at Prime Minister Modi's residence. So the symbolism of the special relationship is matched by the gestures which have been extended to him by our leaders, to President Putin, by our leaders. Now, this meeting is taking place at a kind of crucial juncture in international affairs. On the one hand, you have the peace efforts by the Americans on the Ukraine conflict, which have intensified, and there's been frequent consultation. There was a 28-point informal peace plan which the US put forward, which was not accepted by Ukraine and Europe because they said it weighed too heavily on the Russian side. Then that plan was modified. Then there have been just recently subsequent consultations on the amended plan with Russia. And Russia has said that, it doesn't really meet their expectations, but there are points on which there is some convergence, and the crucial issue of territory remains outstanding. What will be the territorial concessions? What will, eventually be the line which separates the part which Russia is occupied in Ukraine? Then there are issues of security guarantees and so on. Now, from India's point of view, it is important that the peace process succeed, because we have borne the brunt of the consequences of the intensifying conflict between the US and NATO on one hand, and Ukraine, and Russia on the other hand. So if there is peace, if there is a reintegration of Russia into the global economy, it makes it much easier for the two countries to actually develop their economic relationship to full potential. So India is a vital stakeholder in peace in Ukraine. Having said that, we are not an active player in the peace process. So in this case, though it's a very important issue for us, we would have heard out President Putin's account of where issues stand at the moment, how he sees this whole process unfurling in future and what the future prognosis is likely to be as far as the Russian perspective is concerned. The second major issue for the two countries to confront is that, there have been expanding sanctions by the US on Russian oil supplies to India, and now secondary sanctions on any country which buys oil from two Russian companies which have been sanctioned. And these secondary sanctions have caused Indian companies, especially the private sector companies who have been importing from Russia, to weigh where their balance of interest lies, because many of them have more exposure to the US market and would take that into their calculations. So there is likely to be a reduction in Russian oil imports into India in the near future. And then, I think it's important for the two countries to see how they can give a new direction to their economic cooperation. For instance, fertilizers is another huge item for Indian imports. And these are essential imports. They are not optional. They are not imports where we have a choice. So that could be one area where the two countries can work out new partnerships. From India's point of view, we would also like to see Russia buy more, because we exported just about $5 billion worth of goods to Russia. Russia exported about $63 billion worth of goods to India. Yes, this was largely on account of energy exports, and that is a special kind of situation because it's an essential import, and if we didn't buy from Russia, we would buy from some other country, probably at a higher price. So these are inflexible imports, if you will. So the two countries will also see if there are workarounds possible in terms of continuing some degree of oil imports, because Russian oil per se has not been sanctioned, but two large Russian oil companies have been sanctioned. So is it possible to work out practical arrangements through other means? I think the two countries will be discussing this as well. We are looking at finding ways to harmonize our regulatory system so that the non-tariff barriers which Indian exports face in entering the Russian market are reduced. And the goods that we are looking at for possible export include agricultural products, fruits, marine products, pharmaceuticals, electronics, automobile components. So I think it's a pretty full agenda. The two countries are expected to declare a roadmap for developing strategic economic cooperation for the next decades. And this is going to be important. Now, in addition to the economic relationship, which is going to be the focus, there are strategic areas where Russia has been a key partner over the long term, including defense, though imports from Russia have reduced, and they are now about 36% of our total imports, from a position where they were the main supplier, because India has been seeking to diversify. Today, India is seeking to actually develop its own defense industrial base. So where can Russia partner with us in this process? We've seen that the BrahMos, which was jointly developed and jointly produced, has been an exceptional weapon system which proved its worth in the recent Operation Sindoor. There are modifications, upgradations of the BrahMos in the pipeline, possible lighter BrahMos which can be used on lighter aircraft, extending the range of BrahMos. But going beyond BrahMos, what are the areas in which joint development, joint production, could be possible, or which could contribute to India's own production capabilities. We also have concerns about delays in delivery schedules because of Russia's own overextension on the military side as a result of the conflict in Ukraine. So the S-400, I think two batteries are still to be delivered, and it's been pushed to next year. There's also a nuclear-powered attack submarine, I think, which was to be leased, which was in the pipeline. That again is delayed. So I think timelines which can be adhered to for supply of weapon systems to India would be important.
Right.
And that would give the confidence to go ahead with fresh orders for S-400, maybe even S-500, because they've also proved their worth in the recent conflict. Russia is offering, fighters, the Su-57. It's a new fifth generation stealth fighter with full transfer of technology. Here, I think India will take a call because there are competitive offers also from other countries, and it will weigh which best suits its requirements. So there is quite a lot in the pipeline. The Russian parliament ratified the reciprocal extension of logistics support agreement, RELOS, just before Putin came to India, even though it was signed some time back. This means that, India will provide logistic support to Russian ships and aircraft, and Russia can provide logistic support to Indian ships and aircraft. And this means that probably there could be stepping up of military exercises between the two countries, or in any case, it will smoothen and streamline the administrative processes for conducting such military exercises. On the nuclear side, India is looking to expand its nuclear program by a significant leap, given that we want to expand our renewable energy basket and to stabilize and have a baseline, energy provider or source. Then nuclear energy becomes very important because it won't contribute to carbon emissions and help us achieve net zero. Now, apart from the large nuclear reactors, where Russia has been the one foreign country with which our projects took off at Kudankulam, where you already have 2 reactors which are in place. 2 are currently in the pre-commissioning phase. That means they are built and the pre-commissioning tests are going on, and 2 more are scheduled to be built. So the terms for those, I suppose, will be discussed and finalized. But beyond that, new artificial intelligence centers are huge energy guzzlers. Data centers are huge energy guzzlers. And small modular nuclear reactors are being seen as a possible green way to actually provide energy to such centers. Now, Russia is the one country which has actually built a small modular reactor. They have it functioning. It's a floating one offshore, but they are the one country in position actually already with such technology. China has a small technology demonstrator. US companies are still trying to evolve the technology.
Right.
So it's a possibility that the 2 countries could cooperate in this area as well. Similarly, in space, where Russia, if you recall, had provided us the first cryogenic engine, that enabled us to actually have a geostationary orbit. And subsequently, India mastered the cryogenic engine technology and has built its own geostationary satellites. So again, an area of close cooperation between India and Russia. Looking to the future,
Right.
there could be possibilities in this area.
Indeed.
But,
Right.
at the same time, I would say that India has to navigate, because we have signaled that we will not be dictated to in terms of how we conduct our relationship or balance our relations between the great powers. But at the same time, India has equities in the US economically as an economic partner, in Europe, and we would like to keep that open. We also see good relations there. So it'll be a delicate navigating act for Indian diplomacy and Indian leadership.
Indeed. Let's turn to Professor Rahul Mishra once again, who's joined us from the School of International Studies, JNU. If we, Ambassador Meera Kumar has given us a lot to unpack there on the bilateral front, but if we look back a little bit, move back and let's take a wide-angle view a little bit and put this into a regional and global context. You were talking a little earlier, Professor Mishra, about the G2 and, the way China and the US are, dominating world affairs. In this context, if we say India is the fastest growing global economy, our Commerce and Industry Minister goes across the world, talks about the 2047 vision where we are going to be, a $30 trillion economy and the like. In that context, what has Russia, got to lose by they already have a trade surplus of $63 billion. If India is going to be a $30 trillion economy and they continue to do business with us, their economy is going to grow as fast.
Well, so far as trade deficit is concerned, my sense is that we should not worry much about that. Because as Ambassador Shankar pointed out, the first is that our energy supplies, if we did not buy oil from Russia, you would still buy it from other countries, right? From Gulf, from Southeast Asia, from Brunei, from the US, and so on and so forth. So these are essential commodities for Indian industrial sector and Indian household. And this is very important. The second critical aspect is of India-Russia defense is defense imports that we have from Russia. Now, even there, the plus point that Russia has is that they are willing to transfer technology, which no other country is willing to share with us. The US, even on the nuclear side, they had the end user management agreement. They, whatever technology they are willing to transfer, there are so many times there have been flip-flops. They are not really keen on sharing technology. With European partners also, we have seen the same thing with France and Germany and the UK. So the situation is very difficult for India. And Russia stands out as a partner which is not only willing to provide advanced defense technologies such as S-400s and now S-500s or Su-57, but they are also willing to transfer technology. Now that makes it very interesting. So you have to, for a moment, even though it is hurting our Indian economy that there is huge trade surplus, this is not as bad as with what India has with China, for example. India's trade imbalance with China is harming Indian economy because we don't have a reciprocal market access. We don't have equal access to the Chinese market, and there is absolutely no transfer of technology. Whereas in case of Russia, we need to go, as I mentioned earlier, we need to find new ways to work with them on the trade front. Agriculture, to my mind, is certainly not the area where India could do more because of non-tariff barriers. There are phytosanitary norms. There are standards that Russia follows, and unfortunately, the Indian corporate sector does not. Indian exporters do not. So I think these issues have to be kept in mind. There are sectors like pharma, as I mentioned earlier, health sector is another one. Services sector is where I pin my hopes on. And I think President Modi is already President Putin has already mentioned that artificial intelligence and space and semiconductor are the new sectors. So if India and Russia are willing to work together on artificial intelligence, on new and emerging technologies, I think that can be a big plus. That can be a game changer in India-Russia partnership because we already have space, defense, and the maritime sector, shipbuilding, the emerging sector of shipbuilding. So there are new areas on which we must focus on. And I would suggest that for a moment, for next, let's say 5 years, we should not worry much about our imports from Russia. What should worry us is our imports, our trade imbalance with China.
Right. Ambassador Shankar, going back to what you said earlier on in your opening remarks there, you spoke about how the US sanctions on Russian entities coupled with US tariffs on India could be a veritable double whammy for India in particular. In that context, you spoke about, and understandably so, why India could be expected to reduce its imports of oil from Russia. But what's the via media? What kind of practical arrangements that you referred to could both sides put in place to obviate these external circumstances? For instance, when we talk about payment mechanism, banking services, or trading in national currencies, rupee-ruble trade, could BRICS play a role in sort of circumventing some of these issues?
Well, you know, the trouble with BRICS is that when they look at circumventing some of these issues, it always inevitably ends up with Chinese dominance. So I think a bilateral arrangement is far better for India, because India would not like to make payments in yen or Chinese currency. And I think that is what the two countries have been discussing, how to have trade in bilateral currency and settlement in bilateral currencies, and also to encourage Russian investment in India through some of the rupee resources which it raises on account of this trade. As far as the oil sanctions are concerned, if you notice that the sanctions were put not on Russian oil per se, but on two large Russian oil companies. There are other companies. Is it possible that you can work out arrangements which will not, cross the sanctions, but will enable you to sustain some degree of energy imports from Russia? So I think these are all issues which will be discussed, but so much is also contingent on how the conflict in Ukraine progresses, either on the ground, because Russia has been making gains in the Donbas region, and they keep expressing the view that Ukrainian forces could crumble at some stage, or on the other hand, through the negotiating table with the discussions which President Trump has initiated with Russia, as well as with Ukraine and the Europeans, though the gulf between the two positions remains quite wide. But whatever the positions are, they will be influenced by how the situation on the ground develops, because that will be the key factor, in a sense, in determining what are plausible outcomes.
Ambassador Shankar, President Putin came here in 2021 last. That was before the military operation. And, he comes here now, which some people look at as perhaps the end game of this military conflict in Ukraine, which you were referring to. But, the US, which has been imposing the sanctions largely under the Biden administration, and of course the Trump administration looks at putting tariffs on the rest of the world as well. But the issue is, would Trump, who looks at a transactional approach and a deal-making approach, be willing to he's already put this 50% tariff on India. Would it be realistic to see that, he's going to punish India more for dealing with Russia when he himself is actually quite keen to deal with Russia, considering the numerous resources that they have?
Well, I think inner coherence is not a virtue for the Trump administration. They happily take contradictory positions on various issues. So even as they reach out to Russia, even as their companies are negotiating re-entry into the energy sector with Russia, deals on critical minerals, and even today, the US is importing uranium hexafluoride for its nuclear power plants from Russia. It is importing palladium It is importing fertilizers, all these from Russia. So, and Europe has now taken the view that they will phase out oil exports by the end of 26 and gas exports by the end of 27. So though that gives 2 years, to Europe, but India is being punished immediately. So, it's a double standard that we are seeing here. And as I said, the way the conflict in Ukraine pans out, either on the ground or through the negotiating table, will impact all this. Of course, at the moment, there is a bill in the US Congress which is threatening to increase sanctions to 500%, secondary sanctions to 500% on countries which import Russian oil and so on. And, so there are these contradictory moves.
Yes.
On the one hand, the negotiations, especially the 28-point peace plan, which Trump originally put forward, had proposals for gradual withdrawing of sanctions on Russia and for reintegration of Russia into the global economy and even into the G7, which Trump said could again become the G8. But also the possibility that if Russia intervened militarily again, all this would be snapped back and the sanctions would come back. So yes, clearly the US is also looking at a post-conflict scenario and trying to position itself in a favorable position with Russia. Europe is looking at continuing the conflict. They
Right.
don't want to come to terms with the position on the ground. They still think they can change it and somehow get better terms for Ukraine. So it's an interesting situation.
Right.
Added to this, there are internal pressures on the Ukrainian administration because of a corruption scandal, which has claimed 2 cabinet ministers and the chief of staff of President Zelensky, who had led the Ukrainian team in the last round of discussions with the US, and upon return, he was removed. So, it's a very fluid situation. I think India needs to show a little,
Sure.
what could I call it, perseverance
Right.
in
Indeed.
terms of, of handling the situation. And perhaps things will not be so bad in future.
Absolutely. Professor Mishra, while we are waiting for the outcomes from the India-Russia summit, let's zoom out a bit and look at the region as a whole. Would you anticipate or expect some spin-offs for India in terms of third countries or regions, namely Iran, Afghanistan, Central Asia, or for that matter, the Arctic? I ask you this question because India and Russia are both invested heavily insofar as their ties with Iran is concerned. As far as Afghanistan goes, Russia is the only country so far to officially recognize the Taliban there. India is moving in that direction, no doubt. Central Asia, another area of interest for both Russia and India, and of course the Arctic. So could we expect some spin-offs for India in these areas or countries or regions?
I think Afghanistan would certainly be a strategically advantageous position if India and Russia agree on working together in building the Afghan economy,
Right.
working with the Taliban, and keeping in mind the fact that Afghanistan is going through a very turbulent period of relationship with Pakistan. So Afghanistan certainly is something that India and Russia could work together on. Central Asia is, of course, very interesting. India and Russia have been working together in Central Asian region. SCO is a very good platform, especially the RATS, which is an anti-terrorism unit cooperation mechanism. So that is also a possibility. But I think Arctic is where the real gem lies. India and Russia could work
Why do you
together.
say that? Why do you say that?
For 2 reasons. One, even though Russia has enough capabilities to manage Arctic on its own, it needs more partners, and it is worried first about the American increasing interest and intervention in the region, and second, the growing Chinese capabilities and their claims that the Arctic also belongs to them. So they have the Arctic Silk Road and Polar Silk Road and whatnot. So I think the Russian concerns are on both China and the US side, and India stands out as a reliable, trusted partner who has interests, intentions, and capabilities to work with Russia in the Arctic region to optimally utilize the resources available and work together in developing more capacities in extracting resources. So I think Arctic is where India and Russia certainly must work together.
Ambassador Shankar, you were talking about Russia's reintegration with the global economy. What would you say is Russia's identity? Where does it belong? I mean, does it belong to Europe in that context? And I mean, there you say that Europe wants to continue the war with Russia. And I ask this also from the point of view because they are reluctant to allow people into their country. And, you know, people like us would probably have a different identity, which has would have an issue on where they actually belong, whether Russia belongs to Europe or belongs to Asia or has an identity of its own.
I think it has an identity of its own. It's always looked partly towards Asia. The Europeans have also always thought of Russia as partly Asiatic, as they used to call it. And though the Russian elite has been oriented towards Europe, you know, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, the emerging Russian elite looked to integration into European security architecture and into the European economy. Their consumption patterns also, you know, in terms of imports, were largely from Europe. And I think the sanctions which were imposed since 2014, actually, it's not even now, have pushed Russia towards China. You know, the gas pipelines, which were originally going to Europe, now there are new pipelines going to China, expansion of these pipelines, and differences on pricing, which had held these up, were quickly resolved in the, you know, on the back of European pressure on Russia. And today, Russia looks more towards Asia because of the fact that the West has squeezed it into a corner and indeed made it dependent to some extent on China. And that is something that the Russians probably also are not comfortable with. And therefore, they always say that our relationship with China is in one basket and our relationship with India is in a separate basket, and they don't impinge on one another. But for India, it has been a matter of concern because at the end of the day, if there are long-term economic and strategic dependencies which develop, they influence the direction of policy. This time, President Putin, of course, has said that the Russian relationship with India is without limits, you know, putting it on par with what he said for China. But I think that in the real world, the relationship with Russia has to be structured and developed within the realities of a Western-dominated world. So I think there are limits, and especially for a country like India, which has, you know, exposure to Western economies, Western technologies, and so on, and would like to keep good relations with the West as well. So I think that India has to build its relationship with Russia, carve its autonomous space, and preserve it also where necessary. But at the same time, do it without giving gratuitous offense to the US and the West. Now, that's difficult because the US has taken gratuitous offense at very legitimate actions which India has taken in its own self-interest. So I think we have to ride out this period and see what happens in a possible post-conflict scenario.
Indeed. Professor Mishra, carrying forward this very thought about Russia's identity, Russia's sense of its own identity, whether Russia sees itself as an Asian power or European power, just to put this thought, sharing this thought with you and our viewers as well, the Russia RT, formerly Russia Today, is entering India in a big way. Because they've been banned elsewhere in Europe and the Americas, they are looking at India in a big way, and they are increasing their footprint, as it were, in the broadcasting space. Now, the RT India's tagline is, and I am quoting it here, "Not anti-Western, just not Western." Your thoughts on Russia's sense of identity?
I think they've touched the right chord with India. I mean, this is one sentiment that even Prime Minister Modi today, when he made his inaugural comments, he gave a similar kind of impression that India is not, even Indian position is not against the US or against the West, the Western world. It's just that India is Asian enough and strong enough to have its independent existence and autonomous foreign and security policy. So I think RT, the way they've been reporting, is very clearly in tune with Indian media ecosystem, and they're going to work very well in the Indian system, with the Indian masses. Now, as far as the Russian identity is concerned, traditionally Russia sees itself as a double-headed eagle, where one side looks at Europe and the other side looks at Asia. They experiment, and very sincerely experimented, with this idea that they must cooperate with the West, and particularly with Europe. But that idea has not materialized. Russia walked out very disheartened and disappointed. NATO's eastward expansion created a lot of problems for Russia. If you go through President Putin's statements over the past 10 years, it is very clear that Russia has been warning, Russia has been requesting that NATO's expansion towards the east is not a good idea. It will put the Russian national security interest in harm's way, and it will also jeopardize the relationship that Russia has with the European Union and wider Europe. So I think the Russian position is now very clear. Look towards Asia, and in addition to China, India is the most important country for them. So the media presence will do two things. One, directly messaging the Russian perspective on international relations, on domestic fronts, on civilizational, cultural, societal issues, but also facilitating this greater people-to-people engagement, making Indian people understand how Russia works, what is Russia like as a country domestically, and its approach, and also bringing these news items, news stories about India back to Russia, and that will make Russians more familiar with India. So beyond the state-to-state diplomacy and very strong cooperation, this presence of RT, and I hope some Indian media channels will also get equally prominent access in the Russian media, starting with the DD News.
Why not? Why not?
And that will open new vistas of cooperation.
Absolutely.
And this is very important. This should have happened 10 years back between India and Russia, so that there is direct reporting, not through the West. Mm-hmm. And in the international media, the problem is that all we hear about the third world, so-called, or the developing global south, is through the US eyes or the British newspapers. And that, in many ways, changes the perception of Indians. It does not really reflect the Indian or the global south position. The way The Economist and the BBC and New York Times and Washington Post have been reporting of events in Africa and Latin America are very good examples on that count. And we did see earlier, during the COVID times, how people on Twitter, or X as it is today, people on Twitter used to report on Washington Post style of COVID-19 pandemic in the US, and that was hilarious, I thought. So we need greater direct communication between Indian and Russian side, not just on the
Absolutely.
media front, but also wider and greater people-to-people connect directly. And social media is also another possibility. If Russia and India could work more closely on having a common shared platform, I think that will be another plus point.
Indeed.
Indeed, we are standing by for statements of the two principals, which we are expecting any moment now. But we will continue expanding on our discussions. Ambassador Meera Shankar, the defense area, you were talking about really us having concerns about delays in deliveries. Of course, Russia has been fighting a war, so hence there may be reasons why there are delays. But also at the the fact that since the military-industrial complex has been functional, we should be getting equipment that is state-of-the-art and tested in that sense. I mean, after all, we look at how to test particular weapons, and we can see that the war has tested a lot already. In that context, and also the ability that they are willing to share technology with us, is that really the clincher that we should be going with Russia in terms of most of our defense dealings in future?
I think India will continue to have multiple suppliers. I think we want to avoid a situation where we are over-dependent on one supplier, because God forbid, there's some issue which crops up, then that supply gets disrupted. So I think we would like to have a multiplicity of suppliers, but clearly Russia has an advantage in terms of our objective of building a defense industrial base of our own in India. They are the one country with whom we have actually jointly developed, funded, developed, and produced the BrahMos. Apart from the licensed production of their MiGs and Sukhois and other equipment, the tanks and so on, which we have been doing in the past. The BrahMos was a new type of venture because it was jointly funded, jointly developed, and jointly produced. Though there were still areas of sensitive technology in the BrahMos which the Russians did not share with India. So, a lot of it is a question of how you negotiate, because all countries hold technology very closely, because that is what gives them their supremacy. And therefore, for India, it's also how you negotiate with other countries. But at the same time, we can't let the best become the enemy of the good, because what we did get from Russia was about the best that we have got. The other example I gave you was the cryogenic engine technology, which has enabled us to have satellites in geostationary orbit. We had them in elliptical orbit or polar orbit in the past. We didn't have geostationary satellites. So there have been very good examples where we have worked together jointly, or where the Russians have helped us to adapt technology for our purposes, and where they have licensed production, and in that licensing they have given full access to technology and production in India. So that will obviously be a very positive factor when we look at placing orders. But I think what India needs to do is to look very hard at where it can tighten its belt and say, okay, even if we make less sophisticated weapons on our own, let's see where we can do it, and can we, hold out so we make improvements and eventually build the capabilities where we need partnerships and where we get the least life cycle costs, not just the cost of purchasing, but the life cycle cost of the project. So if there is joint production, in India, it means that you have security of supplies, that eventually costs could come down, that in future spares will not be a problem, even if that production line goes off the shelf, you know. So in the US, for instance, this is an issue where a production line goes off the shelf, then spares may not be available. So you have to stock them up in advance. There are issues, and I think the way we have to look at purchase of weapon systems is what gives you the least operational cost and the least lifetime cycle cost.
Indeed. On a programming note, let me remind our viewers that we are standing by for the joint press statements by Prime Minister Modi and President Putin. We'll get you that live when it becomes available. But going back to our guest and the discussion, Professor Mishra. Professor Mishra, we discussed about the media and broadcasting space, how media exchanges should be welcomed going forward to encourage, to boost the communication or conversations between the peoples of the two countries. But as an academic yourself, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it just me, or do you think that there is a dearth of scholarship on Russia in India? There's not enough focus is being given to research on India-Russia ties? Right, we'll try to connect with Professor Mishra in just a bit. But if I can take that question across to you, Ambassador Shankar, do you think that the Indian academia might not be paying enough attention to India-Russia relations as much as one would like them to? Do you think there's a dearth of scholarship in India on Russia?
Yes, I think there is. And, we don't have familiarity with Russia. Today, you have a situation where most Indian families have some relative or the other in the United States, or some family in UK, Canada, or Australia. Mm-hmm. So we are very familiar with these countries socially. Right. But with Russia, I think the social interaction between people has been thin. The economic relationship has been thin, other than in the area of energy and then defense and nuclear and so on. So I think there's need to broaden that, to widen and deepen it as well, to have more people-to-people exchanges, to have more scholarship on each other, to have a deeper and broader, more substantive economic engagement. And that will lead to, a relationship which is not just then driven at the state-to-state and official level.
Right. Ambassador Shankar, if we look at, perhaps some reasons why, we haven't developed enough interest or from the academic point of view with Russia. Perhaps, in literature, for instance, many of their greatest writers are well known in India. And literature has, their writers are known across the world. And similarly, our initial Bollywood movies, at least, were well known in Russia. Maybe, post-Soviet Union, perhaps things may have fallen a bit, would you say?
Yes, I think definitely. As I said, post the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia looked very much towards Europe or towards America. And it's only in recent years when they felt, recent decades, I should say, when they felt that the West had actually tried to take advantage of their moments of vulnerability, that Russian nationalism began to assert itself vis-a-vis the West. So I think that, the attention to Asia, and particularly to India, has been somewhat thin in Russia. But we all know the Russian novelists, whether it's Tolstoy or Dostoevsky or Gogol or the playwrights such as Chekhov. But modern writers today Maybe Solzhenitsyn, but he was really against the Russian system, or Dr. Zhivago, but we don't know that much about their
Right.
contemporary writers.
Right.
And similarly, in Russia, after Raj Kapoor, I think the next popular film, particularly in Central Asia, was surprisingly Mithun Chakravarti's Disco Dancer, which was very, very popular at one stage. So I think that there is scope for increasing cultural exchanges. The Russians have an enormous pool of cultural talent in music, in ballet, in the circus, in gymnastics, sports. So those are all areas where the two countries could step up exchanges to mutual benefit, and it would really broaden
Is
understanding.
weather the real barrier, ma'am? Because at the end of the day, I mean, we live in a warm country, and I mean, the impression is that Russia is really cold most of the time.
It is, but it's heated indoors, So for Indians who experience the Delhi winter without any heating, Russia will not appear that cold because the heating indoors prevents you from feeling cold. Yes, when you go out, you have to protect yourself very fiercely, but Indians are anything if not adaptable. When you're looking at the labor mobility agreement, which we have exchanged, I think that these could be the precursors for more osmosis between the people of the two countries. Because if you have people going to work in Russia on temporary work permits or exchange programs, then you will have a certain, cultural osmosis as well. Indians will get to know Russians better, Russians will get to know Indians better. And let's hope that it's something which works, because Russia has been seriously concerned about migration from China. A lot of it is illegal. They come to Siberia in particular and those areas along the border with China, marry locals, settle down. So it's a huge issue for Russia. Indians, on the other hand, look very distinct. So we will be pretty easily identifiable, if I may say so.
Ambassador, besides weather, as Mark said, do you think language could be a handicap? I mean, should we focus on language as well? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but do you get a sense as well that maybe complacency is setting in the India-Russia ties by design or default?
Yes, I think we need more people who can speak Russian. Russians, at least their diplomats, speak very good Hindi. In fact, their last ambassador, I think, had been translator to one of the leaders and spoke outstanding Hindi. So they have a greater tradition of learning Hindi than we have of learning Russian.
Right.
But we also have a pool of diplomats who have served in Russia, and most of them have a great deal of empathy, if I may say so, for Russia.
Indeed. So we continue to wait for the comments, that the press statements of the two principals.
Maybe in the meantime, we can play out those sound bites again, Mark.
Right.
From
the initial comments that Prime Minister Narendra Modi made and the Russian President Vladimir Putin made at the Hyderabad House when they had that one-on-one talk, and then later on they went in for delegation-level talks. Let's listen once again to what Prime Minister said.
अध्यक्ष जी, आपकी यात्रा बहुत ही ऐतिहासिक है। 2001 में जब आपने कार्यभार संभाला और भारत की आपकी यात्रा पहली हुई, उसको आज 25 साल हो गए, और उस पहली यात्रा में ही स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप की एक मजबूत नींव रखी गई थी। मेरे लिए पर्सनली भी खुशी की बात है कि आपके साथ मेरे परिचय को और संबंधों को उसको भी 25 साल हो गए हैं। एक्सेलेंसी, मैं मानता हूं कि ये जो 2001 में आपने जो भूमिका अदा की, एक विजनरी लीडर कैसे सोचता है, कहाँ से शुरू करता है और संबंधों को कहाँ तक पहुंचा सकता है, इसका एक उत्तम उदाहरण भारत रशिया के संबंध है।
Well, speaking on the matter of the conflict in Ukraine, the Prime Minister stressed that India is not neutral. India stands on the side of peace. The Prime Minister also said that the conflict should come to an end through dialogue and diplomacy.
एक्सेलेंसी, यूक्रेन के संकट के बाद हमारी लगातार चर्चा होती रही है। आपने भी समय समय पर एक सच्चे मित्र के रूप में हमें सभी चीजों से अवगत कराया है। मैं समझता हूं कि ये विश्वास बहुत बड़ी ताकत है और आपको मैंने अनेक बार इस विषय की चर्चा भी की है और विश्व समक्ष भी मैंने रखा है कि विश्व का कल्याण शांति के मार्ग पर ही है। हम सबको मिलकर के शांति के रास्ते तलाशने चाहिए और पिछले दिनों जो प्रयास चल रहे हैं, मुझे पूरा विश्वास है कि विश्व फिर से एक बार शांति की दिशा में लौटेगा। एक्सेलेंसी, पिछले दिनों विश्व समुदाय के सभी नेताओं से जब भी मेरी बात हुई और उन्होंने जब विस्तार से मेरे चर्चा की, मैंने हमेशा कहा है कि भारत न्यूट्रल नहीं है, भारत का पक्ष है और वो पक्ष शांति का है। हम शांति के हर प्रयासों का समर्थन करते हैं और हम शांति के हर प्रयासों के साथ कंधे से कंधा मिलाकर के खड़े हैं।
And for his part, President Putin praised Prime Minister Modi for what he called the Prime Minister's special personal attention towards finding a solution to the Ukraine conflict.
I could share a great deal of details about the events taking place in Ukraine. We are taking together with some partners, including the United States, on a possible peaceful settlement. Thank you for the attention aimed at finding a solution to this situation. Our relations are deeply rooted into history, but it is not the words that matter, it is the substance of the matter which is very profound. We really appreciate that and the fact that you, ex-Prime Minister, pay special personal attention to that.
And President Putin also said that there are growing opportunities for cooperation between the two nations in high-tech sectors, including aviation, space exploration, and artificial intelligence.
As our countries and our economies move, have more opportunities for cooperation. We open additional areas for cooperation, including those related to high-tech, aircraft, space exploration, high-tech, and artificial intelligence. We have very close and trusting cooperation in the military and technical area, and we are planning to move forward in all of these areas. This once again underscores the level and the trust of our relationship. Our teams have done a great work before this visit.
Well, earlier on Thursday, Prime Minister presented a Russian language copy of the Bhagavad Gita to President Putin at his residence in Delhi. And the Prime Minister later shared this moment on social media, writing that the Gita's teachings inspire millions of people around the world. The Prime Minister hosted him for a private dinner at his residence at 7 Lok Kalyan Marg on Thursday night.
Right, so while we stand by for the joint press statements by the two leaders, let's delve a little further into the India-Russia relationship. Now, India and Russia share a 78-year-old legacy of stable, time-tested partnership. The bond between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Vladimir Putin reflects the depth of this strategic partnership, strengthened further through annual summits and the 2+2 dialogue.
Yes, their regular high-level engagement continues to drive cooperation across political, defense, economic and technological domains. And in this report, we are going to delve into various aspects of the India-Russian relationship. Yes.
Russia has been a long-standing and time-tested partner for India. Under the strategic partnership, several institutionalized dialogue mechanisms operate at both political and official levels to ensure regular interaction and follow-up on cooperation activities. The bilateral relationship has remained strong and stable over the past 78 years. In December 2021, A new dimension to the bilateral cooperation was added with the first 2+2 dialogue. Meetings of foreign and defense ministers of both countries started taking place alongside the summit level talks between Prime Minister Modi and President of Russia, Vladimir Putin. So far, 22 annual summits have taken place alternatively in India and Russia. The last summit was held on July 8 and 9, 2024 in Moscow, and President Putin is set to visit India for the 23rd summit in New Delhi. Bilateral trade between India and Russia reached a record high of $68.7 billion in FY 2024-25. India's exports to Russia, $4.9 billion. India's imports from Russia, $63.8 billion. Major items of export from India include pharmaceuticals, organic and inorganic chemicals, iron and steel, and marine products. Major items of import from Russia include oil and petroleum products, vegetable oil, particularly sunflower oil, fertilizers, coking coal, precious stones, and metals. The primary mechanism at the government level for enhancing trade and economic cooperation is the India Russia Intergovernmental Commission for Trade, Economic, Scientific, and Cultural Cooperation. Intensifying the trade and economic relations has been identified as a priority area by both the leaders, who had set the targets of increasing bilateral investment to $50 billion by 2025 and bilateral trade to $100 billion by 2030. India has long-standing and wide-ranging cooperation with Russia in the field of defense. India-Russia military technical cooperation has evolved from a buyer-seller framework to one involving joint research, development and production of advanced defense technologies and systems. RM and Russian Defense Minister co-chaired the India-Russia Intergovernmental Commission on Military and Military Technical Cooperation. INS Turshil was commissioned into Indian Navy in the presence of RM at the Yantar shipyard in Kaliningrad on 9th of December 2024. On 28 March to 2nd of April 2025, the bilateral naval exercise Indra 2025 between Indian and Russian navies was conducted in two phases: harbour phase at Chennai and sea phase in Bay of Bengal. Science and technology has played a key role in the bilateral India-Russia partnership, especially in the early days after India's independence. India and Russia work together on basic sciences, materials science, mathematics, and cutting-edge areas like India's manned spaceflight program Gaganyaan, nanotechnologies, etc. India's only nuclear power plant established with another country is in Kundankulam in Tamil Nadu, which is established in collaboration with Russia. The bilateral cooperation is guided by the new roadmap for science, technology, and innovation signed during the 21st Annual Summit in New Delhi in December 2021. In 2024, Prime Minister Modi was conferred upon Russia's highest state decoration, the Order of Saint Andrew the Apostle, the first called for Prime Minister's outstanding contribution to India-Russia ties. Apart from arms and trade, cultural ties from Russia's love for Indian movies to scholarship programs and tourism have helped the two nations to maintain strong relations despite ups and downs. Around 63,000 people of Indian origin live in Russia. Mohammad Absarul Hassan reports for DT India.
Well, in an interview with an Indian TV network, the Russian President Vladimir Putin was all praise for the leadership qualities and the statesmanship of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Putin said, and I quote, that Prime Minister Modi is not someone who succumbs to pressure easily. The Indian people can certainly take pride in their leader. And he added that his stance is unwavering and straightforward without being confrontational. The Russian president also complimented Prime Minister Modi's leadership. He said, our collective endeavors with Prime Minister Modi carry significant weight because they transcend our mutual ties. Putin further said that ensuring stability. We are moving across live now to Hyderabad House.
His Excellency Mr. Vladimir Putin, President of the Russian Federation, Shri Narendra Modi, Prime Minister of the Republic of Bharat, Honorable Ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I welcome you all to this ceremony where we shall witness exchange of several MOUs and agreements and a few announcements that reflect the wide-ranging, multifaceted bilateral cooperation under the framework of the India-Russia Special and Privileged Strategic Partnership. We will begin with exchange of two documents, namely the agreement between the Government of the Republic of India and the Government of the Russian Federation on cooperation in migration, and the agreement between the Government of the Republic of India and the Government of the Russian Federation on temporary labor activity of citizens of one state in the territory of the other state. These documents will be exchanged by Mr. Vladimir Kolokoltsev, Minister of Internal Affairs of the Russian Federation, and Dr. S. Jaishankar, External Affairs Minister of India. The next two documents include the agreement between the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare of the Republic of India and the Ministry of Health of the Russian Federation on the cooperation in the field of healthcare, medical education, and science.